It's time for the first exercise of this course. You do not need a camera for this one at all. This exercise will be all about thinking. We're going to explore intentions. It will be very simple. Again, there's no consequences or really any right or wrong answers, but setting expectations for yourself is a good way to begin the learning process, especially when we are discussing things like gear and you are considering the gear that you have and potentially the gear you want. So in this exercise, we will do just that. Set expectations. You're taking this course, so you obviously want to capture landscape images or learn more about capturing them. But there's more than that, right? Things that we will think about today are frequency, location, travel, conditions, and beyond that, intent. We'll go through questions to ask yourself, and then I will walk through the exercise myself for you. So first, before I get too deep into the rest, I think it's important to consider your intentions first, in a realistic way. So why are you capturing landscape photos? It could be for yourself, just because you like it. Are you wanting to simply document places you go? Or maybe you want to post on social media or print photos to hang in your home. Or do you want to earn money from your landscape photography? Do you want to sell your work in a gallery or a local coffee shop? Maybe do work on commission for individuals or for a city or a magazine or a website or some other company. Before we go further, I wonder if some of you already feel that you have assessed these things. You might already be capturing landscapes and are watching this course as a refresher or just to see if there's anything more that you can learn. And that's awesome. If you don't want to do this exercise, that's fine. Obviously, this isn't school, but I do think that reconsidering some of these things can be beneficial, either to potentially realize you have different goals now than you did before, or even just to think about how far you've come since starting to do landscape photography. Okay, moving on to more things to consider. When we are talking about personal photography versus professional photography, we will consider the cost of our gear, how much we're willing to spend. Often, if one is doing photography for fun, that person may not want to spend as much on gear. Of course, if you're making money with your camera, you might be willing to spend more. And depending on the situation, there might be expectations, especially with professional work, that you want to keep in mind. This will completely depend upon the client, though. Certainly, a photographer who does photography as a hobby can spend a lot, and a professional photographer can spend not as much. These are not rules, but I do think it's worth considering. Budget is a huge factor when choosing gear, and beyond what you can spend, it's also important to consider what you are willing to spend within what you can spend. What's realistic and practical? Regardless if your photography is personal or professional, what is your level of obsession? Just because someone isn't selling their work doesn't mean that they don't want it to look like it could be sold. If you are absolutely obsessed about your landscape photography, you'll be willing to spend more maybe, go further to get the shot, maybe even carry more than your average person just wanting to document a landscape. And both of those ends of the spectrum, the landscape photography obsessed and the landscape photography documenter, should consider that level of obsession during this course. How often do you think you'll be capturing landscapes? Is it once a year on a vacation, or a monthly or even weekly thing that you'll be doing? If you're only going to be able to do landscape photography every once in a while, does it make sense to purchase a big kit of gear that will sit on the shelf most of the year? It's okay if that makes sense to you, but remember that there is always the option to rent gear occasionally. Where do you think you'll be capturing landscapes? You want to think about the environmental conditions, both weather and safety. We'll talk about how those things might affect gear choice later in this course, but it's something to identify now. What will the weather be like? Will you be driving somewhere to take photos, or hiking, biking, boating somewhere? And on a related note, how long will you be out? All of these answers can have implications for gear choice, but also how you might practice your photography or condition your body for future trips. Okay, now I want to do the exercise for me. What are my intentions? I do sell my landscape images. I don't sell them in a traditional setting like a gallery, but I sell them online, in books that I create and in videos I share. I make my living off of my camera, and my landscape photography is a part of that. I also have a high level of obsession with landscape photography. I love being outside, traveling to new places or places that are difficult to get to, and sharing it with all of you. Aside from the actual photography component, I also love gear. New gear, old gear, high-end gear, entry-level gear. I think it's fascinating to use different items and find their strengths and see what I can do with it. How often do I capture landscape images? Just about every week, often multiple times per week. My gear gets a lot of use. But something else I personally consider is how I am employed with my camera. I'm often using loaner gear, so I need to think about what gear I will actually use. Where should I spend my money? I might be better served to have a few camera bodies from different brands, or even a few lenses from each brand, so that I can test new gear for my videos. For example, it might make sense for me to purchase a Fujifilm wide or ultra wide angle lens, even though I don't own a Fujifilm interchangeable lens camera body. Where will I be capturing these images? For me, it's a variety of places, but I am often hiking or running or biking somewhere, sometimes many miles, sometimes in inhospitable conditions. I need to consider that when choosing gear, but there's also something else. I need to keep myself in shape for that. And then budget. I do this for a living. I am obsessed with photography in general, landscapes included. I do this often. I am willing to spend more on my gear than when I did this as a hobby. In fact, I am willing to make concessions in other areas of my budget so that I can afford it. Of course, that is helped by the fact that my partner in crime, Raymond, is generally on board because he too has the photography obsession. But my situation is somewhat unique. Before I send you on your way to think about your answers to these questions, I'm going to put myself in my friend's position. I have a friend who is also a photographer. She likes to take people pictures, portraits, a little bit of sports, maybe a small event once in a while. But she only dabbles in landscapes. If she were to take this course, it would be with the intention of having the ability to capture a wonderful landscape image when the opportunity presents itself, but she isn't going out to intentionally find those opportunities on a regular basis. Does she really need another expensive lens for this? Probably not. Probably the kit lens that came with her camera body or her phone is the way to go, at least for now, until she decides if she's going to really like this genre of photography and wants to invest more. She could go through this course using her phone to practice the concepts. Now it's your turn. Ask yourself those questions. You may have answers right away, and that's great. Let's move on. But you may not completely know what your answers are, and that's great too. Let's move on. Like I said at the beginning of this video, there are no consequences to this exercise, only benefits. You can maybe figure out where you want to go with your photography and keep that in perspective when we discuss gear, so you can weigh your options. But if your answers change, or even if you think that you won't know what your intentions are until you get out and try landscape photography during this course, that's great too. You don't have to come out of this with all the answers. What you will come away with is the knowledge to head out and capture landscape photos. All right, once you think on these questions, we will begin the next module of this course, all about gear. We'll review a little bit of terminology, and we'll get into the types of cameras, lenses, and the other odds and ends that you might need or just want to get started.